guys, my name is Miss Zajac and I teach 4th grade at Inskip Elementary School. I'm really excited to get to share some history with you today. It's one of my favorite subjects. I know that we left off with westward expansion, so this week we're going to pick up with sectionalism and the abolitionist movement. We're going to watch a quick video, and then at the end we'll kind of review it and go over what's in the packet and the activity that goes along with this. So just before we go ahead and start, if the video is hard to understand, you can turn on closed captions if you have them available to yourself, or adjust the playback speed to slow. Sometimes Ms. Zajac starts to talk really quickly, so if you need to do that, go ahead. You can also consider watching some short clips, pause it, and then rewatch them to help you understand, or watch with somebody in your house and every so often go ahead and stop it and talk to them about what you heard to make sure you understand. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can watch the same video that I'm watching, and then like I said, we'll come back and we'll talk about what we saw, okay?
Last week, we learned about westward expansion, including the Oregon Trail, the California Gold Rush, and other reasons why brave Americans headed west. With a lot of new land comes a lot of new issues, and many people in different parts of the country begin to think and believe different things. Today, we're going to talk about sectionalism and the abolitionist movement. To do that, we need to know what these big words mean. Sectionalism is an issue that is local or regional rather than national. These are things that took place in people's neighborhoods, in their villages, in their towns, and in their states. They weren't supposed to be national problems, but we'll get to that later. The abolitionist movement was a massive effort to end or abolish slavery. See, slavery was one of those sectional problems our country was facing. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth were some of the important leaders in the movement trying to end slavery in the United States. We'll come back to them. First, let's talk about the different places people lived. Some people lived in the North. These include states like New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Other people lived in the South, in states like South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and our very own Tennessee. It was the 1800s. That's 220 years ago, and the U.S. was still a young, growing country. As the country grew, so did the differences in different sections of the United States, and the North and the antebellum South, that means just before the Civil War, found that they were being pushed apart. In the North, most people worked in industry. That means they worked in factories, making items like shoes, farm equipment, and guns. Their soil and climate weren't great for farming, so they made their money making and selling products. In the South, the soil was great for farming. Most people here worked in agriculture. They grew cotton, tobacco, and other crops. They didn't see the need for industry, and their lives were centered around farming. Some other important differences were that the North was mainly urban. This means people lived in cities because that's where their factory jobs were. In the South, it was rural. This means people lived in small villages, farms, or plantations. When you think rural, think lots of land. Because of the factories, the North was changing quickly. Their life was centered around the economy, buying and selling goods to make money. In the South, society was centered around social status. This means people belonged to different classes or groups in society. Some were wealthy aristocrats, some were middle-class farmers, and some were indentured servants or slaves. It was very important that everyone knew their place. This brings us to the big idea of slavery. Slavery was prohibited in the North, which means it was against the law. Black people who lived in the North were freed and paid for any work that they did. Slavery was more commonly accepted in the South. Slaves provided much of the labor needed to farm large plantations. Crops produced by slaves were very important to make money in the South. But people started getting upset with this system. They believed that slavery was wrong. These people are called abolitionists. They believed slavery was morally wrong, cruel, and inhumane, that it was a violation of our very democracy that said all people are created equal, and that slaves should be freed and slavery should end. At this time, a lot of enslaved African Americans were escaping to freedom on what is known as the Underground Railroad. It wasn't a real railroad. It got that name because African Americans communicated with railroad codes. Slaves on the Underground Railroad were trying to get from the South to freedom in the North, Mexico, Canada, and even down to the Caribbean. They hid in barns and relied on people to feed them, clothe them, and provide them a safe place to sleep. They passed secret messages to keep moving until they were free. One of the abolitionist leaders, who was an important part of this, was Harriet Tubman. She escaped slavery when she was 28 and made 19 trips to the South on the Underground Railroad to rescue her family members and friends. She led hundreds of enslaved African Americans to freedom. Other leaders at this time were Frederick Douglass, who was also able to escape to freedom in the North. He worked for African American rights as well as the rights of women. William Lloyd Garrison used his newspaper, The Liberator, to bring attention to the struggles of slavery and worked for the emancipation or freedom of African Americans. Sojourner Truth escaped slavery and became a famous speaker for women's rights and equality. We would not be where we are today as a country without these brave men and women who risked their lives for a cause they believed in.
Alrighty, so your job this week is to learn more about the sectional differences between the North and the South. So remember, sectional means that the problems that we're having were local or part of our neighborhood, part of our town, our village. A problem like slavery, which became a national problem and not a sectional problem. It wasn't just a problem for the South or for the North, because it eventually ends up starting a war that is a national problem. But sectional means that it's just in our area where we're located. And then we're going to read and research and watch videos about the abolitionist leaders. So you can do the 4 that we went over today. So the abolitionist leaders were Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, William Lloyd Garrison, and Harriet Tubman. And remember, they're trying to fight to abolish or to end slavery. So you can do those 4, or you can find other ones that are interesting or that you think were really important, and you can talk about those ones as well. Make sure that you show your learning by completing the reading in the packet and the recall at the end of the packet. There's questions at the end of each page to help you kind of understand as you read. A lot of it will just be a review of what we just talked about, or this video will be a review of that if you've started doing that first. And then you will show your learning by completing one of the activities or more than one activity in the choice board. So there's 9 activities on there. One of them is building a model of the North and the South. So you can use building materials from your house, recyclable materials, Legos, building blocks, whatever you have at home that's creative. You can build models. You can make a poster. One was writing text conversations between some of our abolitionist leaders. So there's lots of different ways to be creative on there. Write a journal entry from the perspective of one of those people. So really try to be creative and think about what life was like then at that time for those people who were really working hard to solve those sectional problems, and especially the problem of slavery at the time. Think about why places like the North didn't have slavery, why they didn't really need to have slavery, and so African Americans were free there. And then think about what caused places like the South to keep it in their institution. Why did they think it was important? So those are just some kind of questions to be thinking about in your head about why we have those sectional differences. Make sure that you share your activities with the people in your house, and I hope that you enjoyed learning with me today. I think this is a really exciting subject in social studies, so happy learning with it, and hopefully I'll get to see you soon. Enjoy!